Tell me a little bit about your practice, if you don't mind. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and what you folks are currently doing in the Raleigh-Durham area.
Sure. So my name's Jeff Hathaway. I am a physical therapist, and I currently, though, don't treat patients. My employees will tell you that I don't for the safety of our patients. I run the business, and we have a presence across North Carolina. We have 7 locations here in the Raleigh-Durham area.
Fantastic.
But we primarily focus on orthopedic musculoskeletal problems. That's really our sweet spot. We do some pelvic health, and we do have one pediatrics clinic.
Very good. And how long have you folks been in the Raleigh-Durham area?
We've been here about 5 years. Been in North Carolina for about 12.
Okay. And before North Carolina?
I actually started in New York.
Okay, very nice.
Upstate New York, Syracuse, New York.
Perfect. It's beautiful up there.
Yeah, it is gorgeous.
Why come down here if that's the case?
Well, 2 reasons. One is it's really nice up there in the fall, summer.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, and then anybody knows anything about New York knows about the taxes. But what people may not know is in the physical therapy field, New York State actually pays or reimburses at the lowest rate in the country.
Wow.
And so I started clinics for the second time in year 2000. I had built it up to 5 locations, started consulting with somebody down here, began to look at the environment down here, the weather down here, and the mountains, the beach, and began to wonder who was the idiot that was in upstate New York paying these taxes, growing practices, and I could get more for my buck, and also it had some of the other advantages that North Carolina has.
Yeah, you really can't beat the geographic locale of Raleigh, in my opinion. It's perfectly positioned between the beach and the mountains.
Absolutely. In fact, I used to go back and forth. For 10 years, I went back and forth.
Oh, wow.
And we finally bought a place, but the summers were brutal.
Yeah.
I'm not a hot weather person, so we have a place in the mountains now, and I go there, and it is just beautiful.
Where in the mountains?
Near Boone and Blowing Rock.
Okay, very nice. So that sounds like an invite, a personal invite, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anytime you want to come out, take
Magical.
fly fishing.
I will beg if I need to, because the Blowing Rock is beautiful.
It is
beautiful.
gorgeous.
Yeah, my brother-in-law actually lives out there, and he is an avid trail runner.
Oh, okay.
And certainly not involved in your industry or ours as a personal injury law firm, but he swears by the weather, except in the deep winters. But he loves it out there.
Yeah. Well, the winters aren't as bad as Syracuse, but you do get the seasons, which I like. I actually like the seasons. I just don't like winter that goes from November to April.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that you've mentioned your physical therapy practice focuses a lot on the orthopedic side of things. How much of your practice is dedicated towards treating folks that have been involved in motor vehicle accidents?
Well, we've been doing more and more of that because what we're finding, our practice is really based on what's called evidence-based practice. And what that means is we use the latest evidence to try to get people better faster.
Okay.
When we first implemented it, we reduced our visits per patient by about 35%.
Fantastic.
And now, people are in motor vehicle accidents. They want to get back to their life.
Sure.
Working with, motor vehicle firms like yourself, you're looking to get these people back quicker.
Sure.
And so that really meshes with what we try to do. We've been trying to do now for 10 years.
Yeah.
People outside of motor vehicles have high copays. They don't want to go to somebody for 20 visits. We
can't afford to.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, we also understand that if you're in a motor vehicle accident, you have other expenses, you have other things that are going on. So if we can get you better in 10 visits versus 20.
Makes sense all around. Yeah, absolutely. So this evidence-based care that you're describing, tell me about the process that you go through in gathering that evidence. Where does that evidence come from? Who interprets that evidence? What is the process behind that?
So there's different levels of evidence. There's a case study, and then there's, what they call RCTs, and then there's when you have multiple RCTs that are basically multiple studies that show the same result. Now you've got a high level of confidence that that's a true study, right? So we basically now hire almost all of our therapists who want to go through what's called residency. It's different than the medical doctor where they get residency as part of their college. We get it after you've graduated from PT school.
It almost sounds like an internship.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Well, it is. It's about a 12 to 18 month process. Okay. But what we found is I can take a new grad, put them through that 12 to 18 months, and they're getting the same or better outcomes than an experienced therapist.
Fantastic.
but only about 6% of all therapists in the country have that, and we have between 30 and 40% of our therapists are either in it or completed it. So
wow.
We believe that brings our quality up to a level that's hard to beat.
Yeah. And so how many physical therapists are working at Breakthrough?
I think we have close to 50 now.
Oh, wow. In the Raleigh-Durham area, can you tell us a little about where your offices are, where we could find them?
Sure. We have an office in Cary. We have an office in Durham. We have an office in Raleigh near the Creedmoor Crabtree Valley Mall.
Okay. That's right by our Raleigh office.
Yep. And then
now we've got no excuse to not have lunch. You know that, Jeff. Like you're building this up. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
We have an office in Wake Forest. We have an office in Apex. We have a pediatric office in Cary as well. We're looking at West Cary, another location in Raleigh. We also have an office in Oxford, which can be convenient.
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, I live in Franklin County in Franklinton, and that's in the middle of nowhere. I'll be the first to admit that it's a little far out there, but the Wake Forest location, that's on the way into Raleigh. The Oxford is on the way into Durham if I come down one of the country highways. But at the end of the day, it sounds like you guys have spread your fingers through the community, engaging the community and trying to establish local offices that are easy for people to get to. Yeah,
convenience is important. I think if people understood that, maybe traveling another mile, you could save 10 visits, they would look at convenience a little different. But we do understand that you have to be, on the way to work or whatever. And we also believe that it's really important to be part of the community. And we also believe that healthcare is very local.
Sure.
So
it's a great way to look at it.
We have some clinics down in Fayetteville. What works in Fayetteville isn't necessarily going to work in Durham, isn't necessarily going to work in Wake Forest.
Yeah.
So, how we go about our business strategy really depends on where we're at. So we try to meet the local needs, start to be part of the community. We sponsor races. We do community events, whatever it is, because we feel if we understand the fabric of the community, we have a better chance of connecting with the patients.
That's brilliant. I love to hear you say that. So let's change gears here for a second. Tell me what made you get into physical therapy. You personally, what's your story?
I have a little different story. Most physical therapists got injured, got hurt.
I'm so glad to hear you that that's not your story. That is the most common thread. When I ask that question, that's what we get.
No, that's not my story. I went to school to play basketball back at college. That's the only reason I went. But then when I got there, I didn't have a scholarship, so my parents informed me that I had to pay for it. So then I realized I probably have a job when I get out that I could repay my loans. And I started out in phys ed, which most athletes did. And then I had to take swimming at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, I got to do something different. Swimming.
It doesn't sound fun.
No, it's not fun. And plus, I swam to not drown. So they're trying to teach me to swim with my head underwater. This doesn't make any sense. So I realized that physical therapy was, I switched over to like an athletic training track, and we had, everybody was telling me there were all these jobs, and I could work with athletes. And I thought, well, there's jobs and athletes, this makes sense.
Sure.
So I got exposed to it. I needed a lot of work on my grades, which then I had to shift and start paying attention to my grades as well. But I eventually got into PT school, and I tell people all the time that I didn't graduate with the highest honors. In fact, I was in the 50% that made the upper 50% possible.
Yeah, the other half of the bell curve has to exist.
We have to.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is we hold the whole thing up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Without us at the bottom, they can't stand at the top.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah. So that's how I got started. Got into the PT field a long time ago. But I tell people I have a great passion for what we do. I just don't have a passion to do what we do. So I think I can have a greater impact by running a business that makes available the highest quality therapy for the patients there.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So I've heard some rumors around our office about your practice, and I've been gnawing at the bit here, quietly twiddling my thumbs, waiting for the conversation to get to this. What sets your your physical therapy practice apart from other PT facilities? What are you guys doing that's unique? What's different? That's what would be interesting to people that are looking for out of the box solutions to their traumatic injuries?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I got asked that question very early on by a physician. I couldn't answer it at the time, and I determined I was going to be able to answer that someday. So a couple things. One we talked about is that our rate of therapists who are highly trained is 4 or 5 times the industry average.
Fantastic.
The other thing is that, everybody will tell you they deliver great quality. Everybody will tell you they have great customer service. Everybody will tell you how wonderful they are. We're one of the few clinics I know of that we actually measure it. So we actually call our front desk and we record our front desk and how they interact with patients.
Wow.
Because if you're going to have customer service, how are you going to prove it?
Sure.
So we score every front desk in every clinic every month. We have the audio. We can play it back. And it's not meant to be punitive for our employees. It's meant to be instructive.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And we score them, and we track it. We also track the empathy and the level of listening that our therapists have with their patients. The patients actually score.
Wow.
So we're one of the few, if only, clinics that I know of where we actually ensure that you're going to have a good relationship with your therapist. Because, a therapist can be the smartest, just like a doctor can be the smartest, but without that bedside manner,
sure,
and without connecting with your patient and your patient feeling like, this therapist really understands my concerns, my fears, my frustrations. If we don't have that first, then what we're going to do is not as effective.
Yeah.
Or you may not come back to your point.
So how are you measuring that empathy?
Sure. We have all of these. We have third-party entities who measure it. There's something called Call to Care, a survey that's been validated. And the patient answers certain questions that we know are part of that survey. And then it's scored and sent back to us. So we actually have a scorecard twice a year that we can provide to any physician or any patient that shows the score of each individual therapist against what we consider the norm. We also look at our what's called Net Promoter Score. It's a very common score.
Yep.
And we look at that. In other words, how likely is it you would tell your friends and family about coming to us, or would you come back?
Yeah, brilliant.
Consistently scored at 90-some percentile, which is very high.
Fantastic. I imagine that's a big part of the treatment process is just being comfortable with who you're working with.
Absolutely. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our patients, and so the more they trust us, right, the more they're going to follow through on what we know is likely to work, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people go through the healthcare system very frustrated because it's not really, this is going to sound kind of weird, but it's not really the norm for healthcare providers to truly listen to patients.
Interesting.
And take the time to really understand not just what your symptoms are, but your frustration, your fears.
Sure.
And we know that research shows that your frustrations and fears has a huge impact on your recovery.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine motor vehicle accident patients who've been through an accident, something traumatic, that still plays an effect with them.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're doing that I think is also a differentiator is we require all of our therapists to go through what's called the neuroscience of pain, the new neuroscience of pain. What I was taught about how pain worked has completely been flipped on its head in the last few years.
How so?
In other words, we used to think that the tissue caused the pain. So if you injured tissue, that's what was the cause of pain. What we now know is that the brain literally decides. It's not that you have a psychological problem, but the brain literally determines the pain, the severity of the pain. And we now know there are ways that patients can leverage that and learn how to get that pain under control.
So I stumbled into this very recently on a podcast through Radiolab, who had an entire segment dedicated to how neurologists and neuroscientists are leveraging that very piece of information to train the brain to ignore pain.
Exactly.
It's very interesting.
Exactly. So we know that the tissue heals.
Yeah.
A lot of chronic pain, we know the tissue's healed, but there's still
latent pain. Yeah.
But it's all in your head type
Sure.
of thing. But it is in your brain, and there's a difference.
Yeah.
So we've actually developed a virtual reality program that takes this education and takes mindfulness and meditation and breathing and pulls it all together. The problem is that most therapists and most physicians don't either have the time nor are they really trained and skilled in those types of things. And so we use stories. So we take this whole neuroscience, this, which as you can imagine, get pretty complicated.
Sure.
We bring it down to layman's stories. So we can relate it to the patient, so they really start to grasp it.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that, bringing it down to how people can grasp it, and you've used the word stories. And as I've heard you describe what your practice is doing in your story, and I've been thinking, well, Dr. Hathaway is a really excellent storyteller. What the way that you're describing what you're doing is by use of narrative. How much of that are you leveraging in what you're doing then? Is that a major part of how you're describing this?
Yeah, it's a major part. So if I take the neuroscience of pain and I can create stories that take a very complex scientific explanation and put it into your world. When I was treating patients, if I had someone who was a carpenter, I would try to explain their situation through carpenter's eyes.
Sure.
Right? Because then he can relate to it.
Yeah.
A lot of times as medical providers, we use a language, and I'm sure people go home and say, he said some kind of word, I don't know what it meant. Well, that's not helpful, right? And a lot of times these big words actually can exacerbate fears. Right?
Yeah.
And we also, there's all sorts of studies around fear and how, MRIs and all these things really actually make people worse, not better.
Wow.
But that's a whole different thing. But yeah, we try to relate to people by listening, by using stories, by really understanding where they're coming from.
Sure.
Because the whole success of physical therapy really is, are we getting you back to the life that you want? Is it with your grandkids? Is it your job? Is it a hobby you have? What is it? That's our goal.
So you, in light of that, you've mentioned a few moments ago something about virtual reality. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit what you mean by that. How are you using virtual reality to treat someone? I imagine it's something to do with how the mind is perceiving pain and how the body is sending those signals.
Yeah. So what we do is we put people in a virtual reality environment. So there's a couple things. Well, number one, they're less likely to be distracted. But we also know research shows that VR can increase the stickiness, if you will, or the how well people understand it, how well it stays with them. And we don't just do one session. We have at least 6 sessions that we do, so there's repetition there as well. But we put these stories animated in VR.
Oh, wow.
So that they do it. Now, what we don't do is take VR in as an exercise or a distraction. Okay, that if you look at a lot of the researchers out there, they're using VR as a distraction. Well, that's a short-lived thing. But if I educate you on how to make your brain work differently, then you don't even need VR.
Sure.
To have less pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But how do you folks use VR? Can you give me, for illustrative purposes, someone who's been involved in an accident? Mm-hmm. What would you be educating them? How would VR be educating them? What are they experiencing through this virtual reality?
So I'll run you through the first session. First session, they'll have an introduction by one of the top researchers in the country, Dr. Tim Flynn, and then they will have actually a testimonial from a patient who's been there. So they start to relate to, okay. They had a similar situation, and they've gotten better. Now, we're not necessarily guaranteeing, especially the more chronic it is, you're going to get completely better. But if you can get back to some of your life, that's the deal. Then we run them through these stories. Okay, we have different stories that help the patient understand and start to empower them as to what they can do to start taking more control of their pain. Yeah. And then we also use breathing, mindfulness, and meditation exercises to help them begin to have tools when they get in a situation, and maybe we had a young lady who was in a motorcycle accident, and she'd be driving down the road and see a motorcycle, and she'd get very anxious. And she was able to use these experiences in VR while she was driving to bring her anxiety and her pain down. Okay.
So this immersive experience is literally retraining the brain in a safe space.
Right. Retraining them how to retrain their brain is probably the way I would say.
Okay, interesting. Is this something that you folks have developed in-house?
Yes, it's proprietary to us.
Brilliant.
We're part of a larger company called Confluent Health, and part of that is the International Spine and Pain Institute, where a lot of this research has been taking place. And so we've collaborated with them in developing this, and we're continuing to tweak it, but we're really excited about it because we think that it allows us to scale this so that more people get the same thing.
Sure.
And it also, again, most therapists aren't really good at this stuff, in terms, especially the meditation, the breathing, and whatnot, and the amount of time that it takes. So if we can give them this stuff and then provide the functional aspect, getting them moving, getting them doing the things that they want to be able to do, we're sort of taking this whole concept of treating pain to a different level.
Absolutely. What made you folks get into the VR? That it just seems so unique. Who came up with that idea?
Well, actually, what happened was one of our patients wanted to meet with me. He had shoulder surgery, and he was working in the VR field. And he thought, well, we could do all these exercises in VR. It wouldn't be as boring. But as I listened to him, I was like, but we have a pain epidemic in this country. What if we could use the same platform, but address pain? And we have an opioid problem, a huge opioid problem.
Absolutely.
And if we could actually have this be something that's kind of a different pathway, if you will, versus here, take this medicine, go home. Because we know that 1 out of 5, given the medication, will become likely addicted, okay, or some adverse effect.
I know there's an epidemic. I've never heard that statistic.
Yeah,
wow.
So, I mean, it's like Russian roulette, right? I mean, you give someone a bottle of pills, and 1 out of 5 is going to have a problem.
That's not odds that anyone would want to play if they understand it. Yeah. Wow.
So, a lot of states or a lot of agencies are saying, well, instead of, you can't give 30 pills, you can only give 5. Well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Right? If you're 1 out of 5 is going to have a problem, you don't want to give them anything.
Yeah, the number's not the problem.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean there isn't a place for opioids. There are.
Sure.
It became the default. And I'd rather see something like this, educating people on how pain works and giving them something to get, stress and those things under control so it doesn't exacerbate your pain. That to me makes a lot more sense. It's sort of the difference, right, between feeding fish and teaching someone to fish. Right?
Very good. So let's move away from the technology and the VR for one moment. Tell me, what do you see as some common myths about physical therapy care that patients or would-be patients often have before they get to your office?
Right. Probably the biggest one is no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
The vast majority of times, that's not the case. There are a few diagnoses, frozen shoulder. Maybe there's a few that you're going to have pain, go through pain to get there. But in most cases, we should be reducing your pain every visit, not increasing it. So that's a big myth. Also, I think people think they have to see a physician before they can see us.
Interesting.
It's not the case. They can come directly to see us. I think they also don't understand the level of knowledge that we have. There was actually a study done that looked at musculoskeletal expertise, and we were second right behind the orthopedic surgeon. So that's pretty high.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than, a lot of primary care and whatnot. We work primarily with primary care because we like to prevent the surgeries rather than treat them afterwards. So our goal is really to get earlier. The other thing people don't understand is that, seeing a physical therapist first versus an MRI versus, medication versus all these other things, the studies show dramatically reduces cost by close to 50%. And I think the other thing people would be interested to know is that especially around low back pain, only about 7 to 10% of patients who see a doctor for back pain are referred for physical therapy.
Yeah.
And when you look at all the evidence on how we save money, that statistic doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't add up. So what advice do you have for car accident victims? Let's say Joe's involved in a motor vehicle accident, is desirous of seeing someone. What advice would you have if you had Joe in front of you and you had a chance to speak directly to him?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, if you've been in a traumatic incident and you have pain, it's likely that you need at least probably an X-ray or some kind of workup that a physician can do that we really can't. So you probably do need to see a physician. However, you could come directly to us and we could say, yeah, you definitely need this. We can assess that. But I would say that I would demand more active care faster. What tends to happen is you're given some anti-inflammatories or an opioid or both and told, if you're not better in a couple of weeks, see your family doctor.
We see that probably 9 times out of 10.
And the evidence is completely out.
Yeah.
If nothing else, because a lot of people say, well, pain tends to resolve on its own in a few weeks. Well, how do you know which patient that is?
Yeah.
Number one. But number two, really the focus of seeing a physical therapist in the beginning is a lot around education. What should you do? What should you not be doing? What's harmful? What's good pain? What's bad pain? There's a difference between hurt and harm.
Sure.
Right? So it's okay to hurt in some situations, but these things might lead to harm. And this is what to look for. So I would say, don't an approach where you're sitting at home waiting for it to get better really doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, so what's the education strategy behind that? Because a lot of times that we're seeing that in our office with patient clients, they've gone to the ER and the ER doctors have given them those discharge instructions. We've always thought that getting boots on the ground, educating the doctors at the ER physicians with that is a challenge that is overwhelming for one law firm or a couple law firms that view the world that way. What do you think the strategy should be if there was a strategy?
Well, I do think that, the reality is most emergency room physicians or physician assistants are trained to handle trauma, right?
Yeah.
Or serious disease, heart attacks, right? And really that's what I want them to be up on. I want them to know that stuff. So when you look at shoulder or pain or back pain, it's pretty low on the list and what they're going to stay up to date on. At least I hope it is, right? I really want them focused on those other, which are life and death. Right?
Sure.
So, but changing habits and changing pathways sometimes is hard. And changing the pathway, unfortunately, the insurance companies, and I know this doesn't necessarily apply to motor vehicle, but they're not helping. They increase copays to physical therapy, so patients say, well, maybe I'll hold off and see if this gets better.
Yeah.
And that's actually a bad decision.
Sure.
Right? The more acute the sooner we see someone, the fewer visits it usually takes for them to get better. And that's probably something people don't understand.
Yeah.
They probably think the longer they wait, there's less of a problem. It'll take less visits. That's actually the inverse.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, I do think, we do need to, and I think empowering patients to know when you leave the emergency room that you could call up to the local therapist and say, hey, can I come in and have an evaluation? Often we'll do a free screen. You just come in, we'll just take a quick look at you, not a full-fledged evaluation, but we can tell pretty quick, hey, can we help you or what's your next step?
Gotcha. So for this hypothetical patient client, let's call him Joe again, he's desirous of seeking physical therapy care. He understands the importance of getting care soon and fast. What can he expect in terms of billing procedures at Breakthrough?
Well, if it's a motor vehicle, he'll have no worries because we work, with the different law firms or through a third party.
Okay.
That basically ensures that the patient's not getting that liability. So we actually, if they were referred to us by a law firm, we'll communicate with that law firm and make sure everything's good, and go from there. So they shouldn't have any. If it was insurance, we would always verify all the benefits ahead of time. So we basically do the same thing, but we may not be calling the insurance, we may be calling you.
Yeah. So, that's for us, probably one of the biggest hurdles that an accident victim has to overcome is the mindset that there are systems and processes in place at law firms or at physical therapists' offices that will allow them to seek the treatment they need, avoiding having to pay, if possible, cash out of pocket, or using even their own health insurance through using a medical lien or a physician's lien that have been built into some statutory provisions. Right. There is, in my opinion, that is one of the biggest hurdles that victims face in car accidents. There's a lack of what I call information parity. They don't understand that the couple things that our legislature have done well is protecting accident victims where they can use medical liens, avoid paying money out of pocket. And I'm glad to hear that you folks are doing that.
Yeah, and, the patient doesn't understand. A lot of times the provider doesn't understand. Yeah,
so that's true.
We've done a lot of education with every clinic on how to handle that.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Dr. Hathaway, I'd like to move away from some of the serious stuff and find a little bit about you, if that's okay. We've been chatting here for about 30 minutes, and I've genuinely been wowed by your practices, I should say. It sounds like you've got a bunch of folks that are working with you and for you. You are, by all measures, an impressive man with impressive business. Tell us something that you're not good at. What do you think that you are genuinely bad at?
I am bad at managing details. I'm an idea guy, so I'm not good at that. I'm not good at treating patients anymore.
You got experts for that now.
I have family members and people I know that come to me, and I'm like, well, let me get you somebody. I'm not. If you're not staying up with the evidence, you can get behind pretty quick.
Yeah.
I still see therapy out there that was the way it was when I got out of school, and that's scary. I'm probably not good. Well, you know what? I'm not good at recognizing when somebody doesn't believe in themselves as much as I do. That's been a frustration. You know, you hire somebody and you see a lot of potential in them and they don't see it.
Yeah.
And I'm hard. I sometimes I wait too long before I realize this isn't going to work.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'd rather be that way than be judgmental too much.
Absolutely. And the exact opposite of that, what do you think that you are a genuine expert in? What if we handed you this microphone and said, okay, it's time to brag on yourself. Let's step out of Planet Fitness's cone of silence and circle of truth. Tell us where you are a genuine expert. And it doesn't even have to be business related. If you are a Pokemon card collector and you can tell me everything about Pokemon, that would be impressive in some form or fashion. But what are you a genuine expert in?
Well, if we went back to what I'm not good at, that's probably bragging. I'm not.
That's probably the best answer I've ever heard to that question. It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. I'm probably the best. The thing I'm probably best at, I think. Well, let's do business and personal. So in business, I think probably one of my best things is that I'm a really good listener and really work hard to solve problems at the right level. Does that make sense? So,
yeah.
You know, if somebody's late for work, you know, I can solve it at that level, the fact that you're late, or I can find out that maybe you have something going on at home and one of your family members is in the hospital and you're not getting enough sleep.
Sure.
Right. So I think, you know, I have that personal approach to leadership. Outside, you know, I love golf, but I'm not that good at it. I love to fly fish. I'm definitely not that good at it. But I guess.
What do you want to be an expert in? Maybe that's a better way to ask that question. Because for me, I love golf. Like if I could golf every day during the summer before work, I golf 3 times a week. I'm gonna dox myself and I just admit that. Yeah. Sunrises, I'm on the golf course 3 times a week, but I am genuinely terrible golfer. Yeah. But I try. Like I'm out there trying.
Yeah, I think, well, probably those two things. If I could be a really good golfer and if I could be a really good fly fisherman, I spend more time, you know, untangling my line, retying my line.
So when you say you're not a great golfer, how bad are we here?
Well, I've gotten better the last few years, but still, I'm probably about a 12 or 13 hand.
Okay, so we definitely need to play for money then. No.
Bad gambler, too.
Even better. Okay, so moving on, tell us something that you think is true that almost nobody agrees with you on. It could be anything from the wildest conspiracy theory that you found in the deepest, darkest dredges of the internet to something that you just have heard from generation to generation from your family. Something that you know to be true, but nobody agrees with you on.
That nobody agrees with me. It's a very good question. I think I don't know if nobody agrees with me on it, but I think enough people don't agree, and that is that I really think that if you live, that principles need to be more of what we do in life. I think we need a foundation. You know, I look at society, I look at all the things that are going on, social media, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of principles anymore.
Sure.
And so, I know that there are people who agree with me on that, but I think it's becoming fewer and fewer.
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
I also think that we need to think more and take time, especially as leaders in business, to be doing nothing.
Interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think a lot of times everything's, we just look at our society.
That's a very controversial statement, by the way. Yeah. That's a perfect answer for this question. That's brilliant. Tell me more.
So, we just get caught up in the doing of everything, right?
Yeah.
In business, you're doing it, right? You're constantly doing things, but have you really stopped and figured out, is this the best way to do it?
Should we even be doing it? Yeah, absolutely.
And it's so easy to become addicted to social media, your phone, this, that, and the other thing. But how often do we just stop and do nothing and try to think? Meditation's getting more and more common, but it's also very hard to do.
Yeah.
Right. But, kind of the opposite of meditation is, well, just try to sit down and think. And it's become a lost art.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, how do I think? I mean, literally, if you stop down and think, you sit down to think, you're going to begin to wonder, well, how do I think? And what do I think about?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, really, how you learn in life is the questions that you ask, right? The answers got us to where we are. So we all have had answers in our life. That's why we're sitting here.
Yeah.
But to go to the next level, it's the quality of questions, right?
Absolutely.
And that's part of, from my perspective, that's what thinking's about. What are the questions that I'm not asking that I should be asking?
So it's so funny that you said that, because that's our final question for every podcast interview.
Okay.
Like genuinely, I could turn my screen around, I could show it to you. But before I ask you that question, you've mentioned a couple times here in our chat, it seems like meditation is an important function of the treatment process, and even how you develop your thinking process. I presume that you meditate. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think it's really important to have quiet time, clear the head. The research is showing it's very healthy for you.
Absolutely. If people want to find out more on how to do that or the importance of it, what could you recommend?
Well, there's a good app called Headspace.
Okay.
That I think is very useful. We have a lot of training around emotional and social intelligence with our managers and our staff, and really trying to change the culture of how we lead. A lot of people think leadership is about command and control, and I think it's just the opposite. My job's not to have the answers as the founder and CEO of Breakthrough. My job is to have the questions, ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And then, because I hire smarter people than me. As my mother said, that's really not that hard, Jeff. But I try to hire people smart, because then I can ask them questions and they're going to have really good answers.
Yeah, fantastic.
So, I think that's, an important thing. And I think we have to quiet ourselves. We get way caught up in other people's opinions. And, I used to tell my kids all the time, don't worry about what someone else is thinking about you, because they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves.
Sure.
So
yeah, that's great advice.
We need to get away from that.
So, Jeff, before we wrap it up, I would like to ask you that question I was referring to a minute ago. Obviously, I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything that I should have asked you but I haven't, either about you or about your practice or practices, that you think that we should know?
No, I just think everything I've said, don't believe me. Check it out. And if we fall short, I want to know about it. I can tell you when we get a patient complaint, it's sent to me. Every patient is contacted. We try to work through that. We try to learn. So I don't want people to get the impression that we figured it all out here.
It's the journey, right?
Yeah. But we're trying.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's our goal is to figure it all out.
Yeah,
we know that we'll never get there.
That's pretty much exactly what I attempt to preach with whatever leadership style I have, is that there's no one here, there's no one anywhere that's got anything figured out. Right. We just need to work on making that 1% improvement as often as we can. Right. That's what's going to move the needle over time. Those exponential micro 1% improvements. I think it's a good time to ask you our final question, or ask you to a final thing for us. Where can we find more information about your practice? Sure. What's the best way to connect with you if someone had questions or concerns, or was interested even in working with your facility if they were involved in motor vehicle accidents?
Sure. Well, the easiest way is through breakthrough-pt.com. On there's live chat if you want to, ask some questions or set up an appointment or get a free screen. You can also click on locations and call any clinic and ask questions. I believe my email is on there. I believe there's a section where you can go to where I have a page with me and some of my comments, but you can contact me directly.
Okay.
My cell phone number is 607-227-6366. I can take calls from anybody if they have a question. But yeah, there's an 800 number on the website. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. So we're out there in the social media world as well. Hopefully we're not clogging people up with social media, but providing some useful information.
Absolutely. Well, I truly think it's brilliant that you just gave your cell phone number out as far as business goes, being available and connecting with people, letting them know that you care to solve their problems. This has been a truly unique experience to chat to you here today. And thank you so much for making yourself available to do this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I
Absolutely.
appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you.